No problem. And in addition to that, the heightened awareness of our impact on the environment with respect to efforts that we can take to reduce carbon through beneficial electrification. And we'll touch on some of these items as we go through. And I'm sorry, we need to put the presentation up on the overhead. So that was, and then Ashton, if you could go to slide, we went through slide number 2. And let's move on to slide number 3. Earlier this year, November of last year, we completed a survey of 500 members throughout our electric system to evaluate how are we doing. And we've been doing this survey over the last 20 years. And overall, we're very, very pleased with how our members are viewing Chugach. And these ratings here really reflect what members give us as far as an A and a B rating. So very, very high in that regard. One thing to point out in that the 3 elements that come up repeatedly as the most important items to our members are reliability, price, and service. And these 3 items generally come up in that same order. Sometimes service comes in number 2, followed by price number 3, but generally it's reliability, price, and service. And even with the acquisition and our operations that we've experienced over the first year of operations, we're still very happy with and are receiving positive results from our member evaluations. I also want to point out that the survey was conducted by Hellenthal Associates, a local firm here in Anchorage. I next want to talk a little bit about the acquisition and the status of where we are today on those efforts. As I mentioned, we closed on the acquisition with MLMP on October 30th of 2020. This really culminated the work efforts that had been undertaken over the last 4 years, working with the public, various government agencies, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, community councils, the Anchorage Assembly, other railroad utilities. And overall, we're very, very pleased that the acquisition has been a tremendous success. And it has resulted in significant savings that have far exceeded our first year targeted levels. And we certainly expect additional savings to be realized over the next several years as we continue our integration efforts in merging the activities of both organizations to really get greater efficiencies through the combined operations. The one thing I do want to point out in this is that when we do receive savings from our electric consumer or from our operations as a result of the acquisition, those savings translate into lower electric rates. It doesn't mean that Chugach earns higher margins, if you will, compared to 2 separate utilities operating independently. Our overall margin level is down considerably in relation to that, such that any cost savings that we do realize are passed in the form of lower electric rates. Next slide. Some of the benefits of the acquisition, and certainly from Chugach's vantage point, and the importance of us acquiring MLMP. Number 1, we retain local control through our member elected board of directors. And this was important to Chugach. We recognize that really not good for at least the downtown Anchorage area and the service area that we provide service to, literally surrounded 3 sides of MLMP. And it provides for consistency in our operating tariffs, consistency in electric rates, and also most important, or just as important, is the local control. We also wanted to make sure that, or we certainly recognize that as a cooperative, we provide capital credits, and versus an investor-owned utility where the profits go in part to shareholders. All of our margins are returned to members and to the community that we serve. We also, under a cooperative structure, we don't pay income taxes, and we have an overall lower cost of capital compared to an investor-owned utilities, and really compared to most municipal utilities as well. And fundamentally, our primary goal is to lower our overall cost to provide electric service, really through economies of scale and through elimination of duplication. As I mentioned earlier, we have a unified operating tariff that we will have after we finish up our integration activities. The other factor that is important to mention is the fact that electric cooperatives in the state of Alaska have a very efficient means by which we can adjust base demand and energy rates. And that's through a simplified rate filing process versus an investor-owned utility or a municipal utility having to adjust electric rates through general rate cases. And that provides a significant cost advantage, cost savings, or efficiency under a cooperative structure that all of the cooperatives in Alaska that are regulated are able to participate in. Our first year savings we're still working on finalizing what those are, at least on a calendar year basis, but on a preliminary basis, we are well in excess of $20 million a year. We're looking really probably be in the $25 to $30 million category. Some of the efficiency areas that we've seen a significant reduction in our fuel cost. We've eliminated the intergovernmental charges. We've seen significant reductions in labor costs through attrition. That's something that we had targeted early on throughout the process, that we would reduce our workforce through attrition. And we have met those attrition targets and expect to continue meeting those over the next several years as we progress through the integration activities. In addition, we did receive $36 million from the municipality of Anchorage as part of a settlement agreement with them that returned some of the equity that MLMP legacy customers had with the municipality of Anchorage, or MLMP. And we are in the process of returning about $1 million a month, and that will continue on through December 31 of 2023. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the primary goal of the acquisition was to have a permanent reduction in our overall cost structure. And what this chart represents is the difference between Chugach and MLMP operating as two standalone electric utilities, which is represented by the gray line on the top, versus post-acquisition Chugach operations as a combined utility, with the blue line showing the reduction in the overall cost. And what we've seen through this and what we are projecting is that over the next 15 years, we will have at least a $285 million reduction in our overall revenue requirement compared to the status quo case of having two utilities provide service in the Anchorage Bowl. I'm going to move on to the next area that I mentioned earlier, and that's electric vehicles. This is an area where Chugach and I think most utilities strongly support the adoption of electric vehicles. It really provides a significant opportunity for us, especially if the electric rates are properly constructed. By that, what I mean is that electric utilities are extremely capital intensive, and our ability to provide service and our goal is to maximize the utilization of all of our assets across, whether it's generation, transmission, or distribution, such that we get greater economies of scale. Well, with electric vehicles, they provide a great opportunity, and something that we're looking into is time of use rates, that once or as structured, we can have customers charge vehicles during off-peak periods where we can utilize existing generation, transmission, distribution assets in a more efficient manner, if you will, by using and absorbing power usage during those off-peak periods. So this is something that we've been monitoring. We still obviously have a long way to go in the Anchorage area. The blue line on this chart represents battery electric vehicles. In 2018, we had 55 vehicles within the municipality of Anchorage, and that has increased fivefold to about 350 electric vehicles at the end of December 2021. The orange line is hybrid electric vehicles, and that increased about 80% from 2018, or from about 140 to 250 at the end of 2021. Electric vehicles in general, every vehicle has a different usage characteristic with it. The typical usage is about 250 to 300 kilowatt hours per month. And the cost on that at 20 cents a kilowatt hour is about $625 a year. That compares with gas vehicles at about $1,800 a year. So we certainly see a significant advantage associated with that. The electric, something that Chugach and other utilities, certainly in the rail belt, have been focused on is expanding our infrastructure with level 3 chargers. In addition to that, the federal infrastructure bill under the Biden administration had introduced and had announced that there would be $5 billion over the next 5 years for states to create vehicle charging stations along designated corridors. And the state of Alaska will receive $50 million out of that total. And that will allow us to expand out the EV charging infrastructure throughout the state. We expect that the Alaska Energy Authority would be designated as a state agency in Alaska for this program. And ultimately, the Federal Highway Administration must approve each state's plan before the funds will be distributed. So this is something that we're monitoring. In addition, the Alaska Energy Authority earlier appropriated $1 million for rail belt fast charging infrastructure along the rail belt. In addition to that, Chugach has an EV charging program that we offer our retail members, and we are in the process of installing more chargers and making a financial contribution to customers for those charging infrastructure. The chargers that we have advocated for to date, at least within our service area, have really been level 2 chargers, whereas what the Alaska Energy Authority appropriated and distributed was for level 3 chargers. In addition to that, Chugach and the other rail belt utilities, we work together to put together the conditions to accelerate or to remove barriers to level 3 charging. And each utility submitted a tariff with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska last month, and we expect decisions from the commission on those proposals later in March. This chart simply summarizes the electric chargers, level 3 chargers that are being put in place under the AEA program. And this really extends along the entire rail belt. Then the appropriations that were given by the federal government would be in addition to the charging stations that are identified here. The next chart, this is just a graphical representation of the electric vehicle charging rate that Chugach has proposed. And the problem with the level 3 electric vehicle chargers is the fact that their load factor is extremely low. That means that basically the level of demand that they take on the system is very, very high in relationship to their average energy use during the month. So what that means on the Chugach system is that customers could be paying over $1, $2, $3, or even more on a per kilowatt hour basis when they pay that demand charge under a standard large general service tariff structure. And electric utilities really throughout the US assess a demand charge and an energy charge, and that relationship is really what drives the average rate. And what Chugach has done in our proposals, we wanted to tie it to, for certain load factors, to our residential rate, still keep the electric vehicle charging tariff within the context of the large general service class. But for customers that are that have a load factor either below 40% or 35%, then we would fix their charge or their energy rate equivalent basically to the energy rate that's paid by the residential customers. And then for load factors that exceed that amount, it would just be under the standard large general service tariff. In addition, several years ago, Chugach established a renewable energy goal to increase renewable generation on its system by 100,000 megawatt hours a year by the end of first quarter of 2025. And the primary objective, in addition to getting additional renewable generation, was to get the renewable generation in a way that would not result in a negative rate impact to existing customers on the system. We certainly operate today, at least in Alaska, under a regulatory standard that requires basically that electricity be provided at the lowest possible cost. There really is not, there's very little flexibility, if you will, to approve energy purchases that result in higher electric rates. There's no mandate that requires utilities to have a certain amount of renewable generation on their system, at least as of right now. Chugach issued a request for proposals in October of 2021 to see what was out there in the marketplace and what technologies would be available or could be made available by entering into a long-term contract with an IPP or other interested parties. And that was issued in October. We did receive 10 potential projects that were identified, and 5 different types of renewable technologies were proposed or advised for consideration. Those included wind, solar, pump storage, hydro, and tidal. That evaluation of those proposals is ongoing, and we expect to make a decision on further study with those customers actually this month and next month. Each one of these that go forward will require additional study to make sure and to quantify both the cost of interconnection and the cost associated with the operation of these renewable resources and how they are integrated into the system. In addition, something that is important to note is that the Alaska Energy Authority is looking at the feasibility and evaluating the potential for additional hydro. It's called the Dixon Creek project, and they're under evaluation right now. Really, 2 options are being considered, and this is very close to Bradley Lake hydroelectric power project on the Kenai Peninsula. 2 options are being considered. One is the diversion of water to Bradley Lake, or the construction of a run-of-the-river hydro project. Both of these would significantly increase the amount of renewable generation in the rail belt. And the timeline on this, if these were to come to fruition, would be approximately 10, 11 years before all the studies and actual completion of the construction would take place. This is something that a lot of us are very excited about the opportunity, and certainly we've seen the successes resulting from the hydro facilities both at Bradley Lake and the Clutha hydroelectric project. And this is something that provides a long-lived generation resource. And certainly through time, these hydro facilities, they only get cheaper in general as time progresses. I do want to mention, as I mentioned earlier, Lee Thiebert had announced last July that he would be retiring from work from Chugach at the end of April of this year. And since that time, the Chugach board has been managing the search for our new chief executive officer, and interviews are being held in February this month. And then we expect that a final decision, an announcement will be made in March. And then following that will be Lee's retirement with the new CEO coming on board in April. Finally, we have our annual election process coming up. We're just starting to get underway with that. We have 2 board seats that are open. Our electronic voting will open on April 20th, and our annual meeting, and we'll announce the results of the election, will be held on May 20th. We're doing something different this year that we have done in the past. We're holding a member appreciation event and an annual meeting on the same day on May 20th. Our member appreciation event traditionally has been held in October of each year. And we wanted to look at this as an opportunity, one, to possibly get additional people to come out for the annual meeting, and also having the member appreciation day event be held during a warmer time of the year, and we can hopefully get more additional participation both in the member appreciation event and in our annual meeting. So our member appreciation event will be held from 3 to 6 p.m. at Change Point, Alaska, and then that'll be followed by our annual meeting with election results, and to meet the new chief executive officer with door prizes and so forth from 6 to 7 o'clock that evening. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great, thank you so much, Arthur. All right, as I mentioned earlier, we will be taking audience questions. And again, you can submit those through the chat window, or you can turn on your camera and wait for me to call on you, then open your mic, and we'll proceed with your question. So I usually start with Bernie and ask if he has any questions. So Bernie, the floor is yours, and then I'll call on Dan Sadler. Go ahead, Bernie.
Sure. Arthur, thank you for the update. I appreciate it. And a couple of questions, I guess, to start with. In the acquisition with MLNP, the RCA had certain requirements for y'all to accomplish. One of them was the Rail Belt Reliability Council, which is meeting and trying to form what they call the Electric Liability Organization, the ERO. Could you do you have a update on where that status is right now, or is that something that somebody else should talk about?
I have not, Bernie, I've not been directly involved in that. Brian Hickey has been, and I think with Julie Esty at MEA have been spearheading that effort, certainly with Chugach and MEA. I know there's working on filing the tariff. Right. For that. I think that's going to be the end of next month, but I think Julie, she's on, she may have more information on that. Okay.
And maybe she can touch base when she raises her hand. So Julia, could you kind of give us a little update, because it is pertaining to Chugach and all of the rail belt utilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bernie, and thanks, Arthur. We have been working very closely with Chugach as well as the other utilities and many other stakeholders on the formation of the Rail Belt Reliability Council. And just for folks, reminder, this is something that the RCA is required to form for the rail belt system. So from Homer to Fairbanks, per a statute in Senate Bill 123, which passed a few years ago now, the RCA has now created regulations and given notice to the rail belt utilities that we will be under the jurisdiction of an ERO. That notice started a 90-day clock for applications for folks who wanted to become the Electric Reliability Organization. And so there's been a group of us that have come together to create an organization to apply to become that. Applications are due March 28th. So it's been coming up very quickly. And we've been working very hard, very long hours, getting all of the deliverables that are required for the application, and also incorporating, we're going through that process now to become an actual entity. In the past, we've just been a group of volunteers working together. Now we will become an entity, and our first board meeting will be held March 14th. So that will be exciting. We'll be accepting and adopting all of the bylaws and different policies that we've been working on, and then conducting a review of the application. And then ideally by March 25th, we will a vote to send the application and file it on the 28th. So it's coming to a head really quickly, and happy at another time, not taking away from Chugach's time, to provide an update to this group about what that looks like now and where we all came to now that it's an actual organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for the update. And I've been following your meetings with your minutes, and I know y'all have been meeting quite regularly. A lot of hard work goes into that. Okay, Arthur, is there any other questions out there, Juanetta?
Yeah, let me call on Dan Sadler. Dan? Dan, go ahead.
There we go. Okay, I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Very good. Thanks, Mia. Sir, I was interested and appreciate the report on the continued advantages of the combination of the utilities. Could you speak a little bit more about the specifics of the streamlined rate filing? I'm specifically interested in what is the new status of the combined utilities that allows that streamlined rate filing, and just how much faster is it? I assume that provides a little bit more agility in response to market or technical advances, but could you explain how much, why that's going to be happening and how much faster that will allow you to file rates?
So, yeah, very good question. So let me first start that electric utilities that for cooperatives in the state of Alaska have a regulation that allows them to adjust base rates on a kind of a streamlined process. So we don't have to do a full cost of service or a rate design study. With these filings, we basically can submit filings either on a quarterly or a semi-annual basis to adjust base rates, relying on the decisions that our board of directors make regarding changes in rates. And the reason this is efficient is that we don't have the adjudicatory requirements under a structure under the SRF process. So we can adjust rates for changes in electric sales or changes in our cost structure, either upwards or downwards, on a routine basis every 6 months or every 3 months. There are limitations. Rate increases cannot exceed 8% in a 12-month period or 20% in a 3-year rolling period. That's not to say that we still don't do rate cases. The cooperatives still undertake cost of service and rate design studies in the context of a general rate case, but it's done on a much, much less frequent basis. So generally, we can go 3 to 5 years without filing a general rate case, provided we're operating under the simplified rate filing process. And in contrast, in an investor-owned utility in Alaska or a municipal electric utility, they cannot adjust rates based on the SRF process. So they have to go in for a general rate case. General rate cases can be very, very expensive. And I think MLMP's last rate case exceeded $3 million, I think, on their side alone. And to the extent that rates can be adjusted in the outside of a context of a rate case, it provides significant cost savings, not only to the utility, but that results in lower rates and lower adjudication efforts overall to have those rates adjusted. So we certainly, this is a huge advantage that we see with electric utilities that are cooperatives in the state of Alaska. And it provides a lot more efficiencies throughout the overall regulatory process.
Thank you, sir.
Arthur, you mentioned the growth of electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, and I'm wondering what the utility might be anticipating in terms of as the use of electric vehicles grow in the state, then obviously those vehicles, those drivers are not paying fuel tax. And how the utility might address that, or how the utilities collectively might work together to address that.
No, that's a good question. I think, other states are grappling with the same, through their registration fees, to somehow make sure that they are able to, pick up those revenue shortfalls. I think that's something that's going to eventually will need to be addressed, whether it's done through the registration fee process or some other mechanism. But we certainly recognize that, the fuel tax is a critical funding source for the maintenance of our highway system and road system. So that will have to be looked at.
You also mentioned that some of the cost savings that the utility has realized since the acquisition of ML&P has been through workforce attrition. And that's a unique position to be in at this moment in time, because workforce is certainly a critical issue for many employers right now. But I'm wondering, as you've worked towards right-sizing the utility post-acquisition, what do you see in terms of workforce moving forward? What maybe are some critical occupations that you'll be looking to ensure that there's a good pipeline and training mechanism to backfill some of those positions moving forward?
I think it's really across the board. Certainly in Chugach's situation, we do have kind of an older workforce, and we recognize that with the acquisition, that our attrition, really achieving those attrition targets was not going to be a challenge. In fact, it was going to be, how do we attract and maintain our existing workforce and to continue to grow. And I really think, on the engineering side, I think on the lineman side, we're seeing, even on the regulatory side of the business, we're seeing a significant need for additional, employees in those areas. So I think what's going to be critical is that, even from a state perspective, that we can attract people to live in Alaska, so we have a good qualified workforce and support our universities and additional training opportunities, in the field for field operations, and continue those efforts. We certainly don't think that this environment is going to be changing really in the near term. I think it's going to take time. We've got to work to retain our existing workforce and support additional educational opportunities for the workforce in their entirety. So it certainly has been, I think our attrition targets, and then the level of retirees, I think the COVID pandemic, exacerbated some of the transition that we're seeing. And I think what we're experiencing is, consistent with what a lot of companies throughout the US are seeing.
Are you considering any sort of incentive or step-down programs to sort of slow the retirement rate from your older workforce?
Not. I think we're always looking for ways to make sure we can retain our qualified employees throughout the organization, and we look for something that we are looking at is maybe alternative. What things can we do from a work rule perspective to accommodate workers with their balancing of their work and their own personal life. We're always looking at that. We have a program that, in fact, we just talked about a couple of weeks ago to expand an option related to that. So that's what we're looking at right now, and to make sure that our compensation is competitive with the industry.
Great, thank you. Bernie, did you have another question? I saw you turn your camera on.
Well, yeah, the Governor Dunleavy, I think it was last Friday, introduced a couple of bills. I think it's SB 179 and HB, 301, I believe, which basically stated that he would like to have the rail belt utilities have renewable standards, or not standards, but renewable energy by 80% by 2040. And then it goes in increments. I think it starts by 20% by 2025. And you, Chugach, have already made a commitment to put 100,000 megawatt hours, I think by 2025. And does that fit in with what your view or Chugach's view is? Does it kind of fit in with what the governor is trying to do? And I will say, you know, it's, even though they were introduced Friday, the session is, you know, just about over. And I don't know if it's going to become, you know, statutory yet, but nonetheless, it is something that people are talking about. So I guess I'm just curious, what is your take on trying to meet? That's a pretty high standard. I know hydro is a big, you talked about Bradley Lake and the diversions, and I think there's a couple of three smaller hydro projects that Chugach is looking at. What are they? Moose Pass, Snow River, and Grant Lake, which would all add, you know, a little bit more. And then the governor has also added geothermal, and obviously Mount Spur has more potential because there's a geothermal bill out there to expand the acreage for that. And that's right next to Beluga. So it could tie in to the long term of renewable energy. So if you could just speak to that, Arthur, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Let me first say that our current Chugach today, we're about 23% renewable generation, and adding 100,000 megawatt hours under our goal would put us around 28%, is where we would be by first quarter of 2025. And right now, let me say this, that we are actively working with the other rail belt utilities and the administration to really make the RPS technically feasible and financially responsible to our members. And that really is where we are. And that's kind of a very active, and lively discussions that are taking place right now on that, to try to make sure that we work together and look at it from those perspectives.
Great. Thank you, Bernie and Arthur. We have another question from Dan Sadler in chat. He's asking, of the 10 respondents that you had to your RFP for renewable projects, can you speak to how many of them are Alaska based or have at least some kind of Alaska linkage?
I would say it's about 50-50 is we're Alaska, and the other 50% we're outside of Alaska. And I can't speak with any specificity because of confidentiality agreements regarding those. But there are interests from outside of Alaska. I think that is what the main question is. But yes, that is correct. It's about 50-50. Great.
With regard to those kinds of capital projects, are most of those projects being financed off the balance sheet, or what's the capital market that you're looking to finance those projects moving forward?
So under the structure of these, they would, at least how we're looking at it right now, is that we would be a purchaser of the output of these projects. So the financing would be completed on their side of the equation, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think that there may be opportunities that a lot of the renewable projects that are out there do have optionality for purchasing in future years, and that certainly would be a consideration that Chugach would make given the economics and the business environment at that time. But right now, these would be, as currently looked at, would be considered purchase power agreements.
Great. So one question I like to ask all of our presenters is, what's on the top of your wish list from a public policy standpoint, either from either state or federal governments, or the regulatory agencies? What are the top things on your wish list from a public policy standpoint that would make Chugach's work easier, better, amplified in some way?
I think right now the key area that we really are focused on is the opportunity with the amount of grant funds that are available that could really provide long-term benefit for all the utilities in the state, whether that be a major capital contribution from the federal government for a Susitna or another alternative hydroelectric facility that would provide long-term economic benefit to our members. I think we could look at the Bradley Lake model and how well that really has worked, and working with the other railroad utilities to get that those efficiencies resulting from that. I think in that context, that provides long-term benefit not only to today's ratepayers, but for generations to come. And then that ultimately, it provides for greater efficiencies and reduced carbon, throughout the entire system.
Great. Well, our audience is uncharacteristically quiet. I'm not really sure if you've just answered all of their questions, but
I have another one.
okay, I'm going to put one last call out to the audience to either raise your hand, turn on your camera, or use the chat window, and we'll go back to Bernie. Bernie?
Yeah, Arthur. One of the other requirements that the RCA put on Chugach when they purchased MLMP was to form a tight power pooling with MEA. And I know that the deadline is coming quite fast as far as what the RCA put on the requirement. And I know that the MEA and you, Chugach, have been working hard to do that. And I read something that there's possibly a glitch in the computer programming that would help form this, or follow the tight pooling. And without putting yourself in a position that you're in negotiations with MEA, how is that going now? Are you working through the situation, and can we expect, and for people in the audience that really don't know what a power pooling is using the most efficient generation at any time. And you and MEA have done that in the past on a volunteer basis, but this is a little different because it's a requirement by the RCA. So if you could address that without going into, negotiations problems, I appreciate it.
Sure, you bet. Well, I can, Chugach and MEA, we are good, excellent partners working together and trying to get the maximum efficiencies that we can through the utilization of our joint generation assets. And, we're still working together, and we both recognize we have upcoming filing deadlines, and we're working, hope to continue working together as we try to achieve those, or if we need to ask for additional time, we'll be looking at that in that context. But we're certainly also working on the acquisition or the acquiring the appropriate software and so forth. So those are ongoing. But overall, we're making significant progress, and we're continuing to make progress in that regard.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Bernie.
Thank you.
Yeah. Arthur, David Lockard with AEA is on with us, and he's asking what are Chugach's plans for battery energy storage, battery energy system storage. And we've heard certainly from some of our rural utilities that they've been successful with those kinds of configurations.
Correct. We are looking at putting approximately a 70 megawatt battery within our service area, and provide additional system stability and regulation to support the integrity of the system. And we expect that hopefully will be online sometime in the fourth quarter of 2023. That's kind of the timing on it.
Interesting.
And that also would be, a part of that also would be with MEA's potential participation in that battery. I think it's important to note that.
Well, you have indicated with the renewables projects under consideration that you can't disclose too much, but is there anything that is you would like to see added to the Chugach portfolio that's a newer technology that doesn't exist now in addition to the battery storage?
I think technologies that are efficient and can be integrated into the system are attractive. And I think that's something that we also need to, all the utilities need to be recognized, is the fact that we don't want to increase our overall cost structure if we can avoid that. And if we can get technologies and renewable generation in our system that doesn't have a negative impact to our members, but yet still gives us a reduction in our carbon footprint, I mean, that really is an ideal situation. Certainly Chugach is wide open on the technologies, and that was one of the reasons why we issued an RFP. That was to make sure that we didn't want to leave anything out. What other technologies are out there that we're not thinking about? If there is something out there that's that can beat our avoided cost, that we're not aware of today, then we absolutely, our doors are wide open and to review those alternative technologies that could do that.
Again, recognizing NDA restrictions, but is there something in that group of projects that would be first in class for here in Alaska if you were to implement it?
I would say that among them on the list of the technologies that I identified, yes.
Interesting. All right. Okay. Well, again, one last call out to the audience for any final questions for Arthur. Okay. Well, as folks are considering that, again, I'll just say that we will look to moving back to in-person study sessions moving into March. And we hope to have that information to you by the end of next week. And you can always submit your ideas for future study sessions to me at exec@commonwealthnorth.org. And I'll bring Bernie back in for any final comments from him. And I'll also just add my thanks to Arthur and the team there at Chugach for helping make your appearance here today possible. Bernie?
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. Thank you very much for this great update. And I know it's been a very, very busy time for y'all for the last couple of years, for sure. You've been working on this for a long time. And I'm glad to see some cost savings coming in from the acquisition from LNP. It's really good for the rail belt and for Anchorage, for sure. And continue your great work. And thank you again for making your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday, and wish a good weekend to everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.